Let's actually save and load. We're not going to do anything with widgets in this video, so when we hit load nothing's going to happen. Instead we're just going to work on our quick save and our quick load to prove that it actually works. Now you may remember a few videos ago we made our VN save game, which doesn't have any variables yet. We'll deal with that in this video, and our VN save interface, which basically holds the functions for when we do our on new game, on save game, and on load game. So basically in this video all we're going to do is go through each one of the stuff that had these functions in it and tell it what to do when we save and load our game. The most interesting one is probably our dialogue, so we'll start there. That's because we start our dialogue here, but obviously we don't want to just start our dialogue and have it start at the very first node, because that's not where we would usually save our game at. So when this plugin was released, I asked for the ability to resume a dialogue based on your current index, and they added that function for us, so that was cool. We can do that by using the resume dialogue node over here. And you'll see that we still have to pass in a dialogue and its participants. However, we also pass in the start index where we save and our already visited nodes. There's also this boolean here for fire enter events, but we never want to check this because if you leave this checked, it is possible for the player to go to a node that increases a character's affection for you, for example, save and then load, and then it would get fired. The enter event would get fired again when you load. So the affection would increase once again. And they could just do that over and over to infinitely increase the character's affection for you without, doing any of the stuff they're supposed to do to increase the affection. So that's why we're going to be leaving this unchecked. Now obviously we need to know which dialogue to load when we resume our dialogue, so let's just save the name of our dialogue whenever we start our dialogue. That way we know what the dialogue we're supposed to start is when we load our game. So let's just delete this for now. And I'm going to add a new variable here. This is going to be our current dialogue name, and its type is going to be name. And whenever we start a dialogue, we're just going to get the dialogue get object name, and this returns a string for some reason. I'm not sure why, even though it's called get object name, but whatever. And we will set our dialogue's name to be that after we update our text. Now that we have our current dialogue's name, we can actually add our variables to our save game, because the current index and our visited nodes is actually a function we can do in our current dialogue context. So let's just add the variables for our current dialogue name. Its type, of course, is going to be name, and it's going to be a single variable. And we also need the active node index, and this, of course, is going to be an integer. After that, we need the visited nodes, and it's going to be an integer set. And I believe that's it for now. So let's go back to our dialogue and actually do the saving and loading of our dialogue stuff. I'm going to choose to do that somewhere down here above our event on new game. So let's do the event save game first. We're going to do the event on save game. And when we do our save game, we're just going to set the dialogue name to be our current dialogue name, like so. And for our dialogue current index, we can just get our dialogue context right there and get active node index. Let's set our save game's active node index to be this, and we'll also do the same thing for the dialogue context get visited node indices. Set visited nodes like that, and make sure to plug in the execution pins, otherwise these won't get called. Great, now when we load our game, do our event on load game, we can just resume our dialogue. So resume dialogue, there it is. And to get our dialogue, that's already done in our asset manager, so we can just get our save games get dialogue name and get object from primary asset ID, split this struct, choose the scripts, and plug in our current dialogue name. We of course also have to convert this to a DLG dialogue. So cast to DLG dialogue right there, and plug that into our dialogue. Now for our participants, we're just going to do our get participants function and pass in our dialogue over here and participants into there. The start index is just going to be our save games get active node index, and the already visited nodes is just our get visited nodes. Once again, we're going to leave this boolean as false. Once we've resumed our dialogue, we can just set our dialogue context to be whatever our dialogue we get from here is, and we should also set our current dialogue name to be the save game's current dialog name. Otherwise, we won't be able to save properly if we load a game and then try to save. And after that, we should probably update our text so that it reflects, well, whatever our text is. Now, this isn't going to work very well if you just leave it like what it is right now, because our characters are completely wrong. None of their variables are getting saved, and if we don't deal with that, then they're always going to be unintroduced and their variables are always going to be defaults. So let's deal with that. If we go to our participants, we can see what variables we need to save. First off is our character's image, the current expression. Otherwise, they're going to spawn with the wrong expression, of course. We need their target X, so where they are, and their opacity, so if we can see them, and if they are introduced. So instead of saving a bunch of arrays for each of these variables, I'm going to make a structure to hold all of the variables for each individual character. So if we go back to our content browser, right click, go to blueprints, and choose structure, we can make something called character, let's say save info. And if you don't know, a structure is just a container of variables in Unreal 4 blueprints, at least. In other coding languages, a structure can actually have functions, and it basically behaves exactly like a class, except in Unreal blueprints, where it just contains variables, which is fine. So let's go into our character save info and make our variables. The first one is going to be our expression, and this is going to be of type name, because we're going to get it through the asset manager. The second one is going to be our position, so our current X. That's going to be a float. And we need our opacity, which is again a float. One more for if we are introduced, which is a boolean. If you had any other variables that every single character had, like if you were playing a visual novel where every single character had an affection level for you, this is also where you would save it. But if you had only special variables for individual characters, you would have to save that separately in your save game. But anyways, going back to our save game, I'm going to add another variable. This is going to be our character info. Sure, let's call it that. The type is going to be a name, our character's name, and we're going to make this a map. So our key is our character's name, and the value is going to be the character save info, because we're going to save a character save info for each character. And back in our participants, we can do event on save game, and on the save game, all we're going to do is get the character's info and add our own data to it. So for the key, we can just pass in our character's name to string and then to name, because you can't go from text to name for whatever reason. And for the struct, we can just split it. The expression is going to be our character's image. We're going to get the brush and split that structure, get our brush image, and get the object name, and pass that into the expression. For the position, it's just going to be our target X, and our opacity is just going to be our target opacity. Our introduced, of course, is just if we are introduced. Get introduced right there. Now when we load our game, event on load, we're just going to get the character info, and we're going to find our character's name to string to name. And then we're going to set all of our variables based on the struct we find. So our expression is going to be the get object from primary asset ID. We're going to choose, we're going to split this and choose our characters and pass in the name from the expression. And then we're going to get our character's image and set brush from texture. We also have to cast to texture 2D and pass this into our texture. As for the position, we can just set our target X to be our position, because if we don't do this, then they're going to try to move back to wherever they were before. And set our character's image, set render translation, split this, and pass in our target X to the target translation, translation X. We're going to do the same thing for opacity, so set our target opacity to be our opacity, and set our character's images render opacity to be our opacity. As for the introduced, we can just set our introduced to be if we are introduced or not, so right there. And I think that takes care of saving and loading our characters. Let's go back to our dialogue now, and after we do all of our stuff to save our current dialogue stuff, we can just get our characters, copy and paste. And for each of these, we need to tell them to do on save game, passing in the save game from our own event on save game. That's for saving. Now, when we load, we actually need to do our character stuff first, otherwise our dialogue is going to start with the wrong information about our characters. So let's move all this stuff over, get all of our characters again, and just tell them to do the load game. Let's just test this really quick. So let's go to our quick save and quick load button. So quick load, add an event, and quick save. There it is, add an event. And for now, when we do our quick save, we're going to create a save game object. The type, of course, is our VN save game. And then we have to tell ourselves to do the on save game. So do on save game interface call. The target, of course, is ourself, and then we have to actually save our game. So we're going to do save game to slot. The slot name is just going to be quick save, like that. On our quick load, we're just going to see if the quick save slot exists. So does slot game exist? It's going to be quick save. Make sure you type it in exactly like you did in both of them. And then we're going to tell our dialogue to just do on load game interface call. And the load game, of course, is going to be, oh, we have to actually load our game. So do load game from slot. Slot name is quick save. And pass in this return value to our save game, which we can't do because we have to cast to VN save game. One thing I forgot to do, we have to actually branch if our save game exists or not. So let's do a branch, and only when this is true will we actually load our game and, well, load our game. We hit play, start, and if we do a quick load, nothing happens. If we do a quick save and then do a quick load, the game seems to start over. So let's just move ahead a little bit, and let's save right here, quick save. And we will go back to our options menu, start, we're back at the beginning, and hit load. And we're back at this slot. Her name is Yuri, and all that stuff is good. Also, she is introduced, which is good, because if we went back to our options and menu, start a new game, her name is question marks. When we do a quick load, her name is Yuri. That's great. Now we have to deal with the other classes that need to have their variables saved and loaded when we, well, load our game. So for example, if we were to quick load right now and go to our history, you'll see that we have the very first line, and then we have our current line, but none of the lines in between are showing up. So we need to save our history. To save our history, I'm just going to go back to our save game, and I'm going to add a new variable, and this is going to be our history. And instead of being an array of text, like you might think, we're going to make this an array of strings, because I'm going to combine our history speakers and their text to be in the same line, because we can't just save the history's text, otherwise we won't have the speakers, and we obviously can't just save the speakers, otherwise we won't have the actual history. So we're going to combine them into one string, and then we're going to split it when we load our game. So back in our history, we have our event on new game, and now we need to do our event on save game. And on event save game, first thing we need to do is actually clear the history. So to do that, we could either set the history to be nothing, or we could get the history, there it is, and tell it to clear. I'm not sure which one's faster or more performant, but I'm just going to go with the clear method instead of setting it to nothing. Now you might be wondering why we have to clear our history, but that's because our buttons for when we save and load our game are actually going to contain the reference to a save that we're going to pass in when we save and load our game, instead of creating a save game every time we want to save our game. So that's why we have to clear our history, because it's still going to have its previous history when we save our game. So after we clear our history, we're going to have to go through each of our children in our scroll box, so I'm going to do that really quick. And of course now we have to cast the child to the history entry, because that actually contains our text for our speaker and its, well, text. So as a history entry, we're going to get the text, what is it? Entry text, there it is. And we're going to get the speaker name. And now we're going to combine them into a string, but we can't just combine them like putting them together, because we wouldn't know where to split it in order to, well, separate our speaker name and our entry text. So I'm going to use a character that nobody ever seems to use for anything. I'm actually not sure what it does outside of programming. I'm talking about like in just grammatical English terms. And that is the sort of straight up and down line above your enter. When you do shift on the dash thing, it gives you this up and down line. And I'm going to be using that to separate it. So let's do a append string, and we're going to add a pin, and the middle one is going to be this character, and we're going to plug in our speaker name to the A and the entry text to the C. And then we're just going to add this string to our save game's history. So save game get history and add our string. And that should take care of actually saving our history. When we do our event on load game, we want to first clear out our scroll box because of the reasons I mentioned when we did our event new game. I'm not going to explain it again, but get our scroll box and clear children. To be frank, I'm just too lazy to explain it again, but you know, whatever. We'll get our save game get history, and we're going to go through each of these. So for each. And this should never actually exceed our history length because that should be taken care of when we actually add to our history. So our history should never actually, we should never actually have to account for if our scroll box children count is less than our max history length or not. So instead we're just going to create our history widget and add them children and do all this stuff. So let's just copy this, paste it here, and whenever you decide you want to change your padding for your history, make sure you do it for up here, for down here, and up here. Anyways. Or you could also have a variable for your padding and just, you know, plug it in, but I'm going to do things like this. So when we get our array element for our history, we're going to do a split. The in string is that up and down line, and our left string is our speaker's name, and our right string is our, get out of the way, is our entry text. So to actually call this event and our save game event, I'm just going to do it in our game instance like we did for our new game. So let's do our right-click event on save game and event on load game. And we're just going to get our menu widget to get our history widget. So get menu widget, get history widget, the W underscore history, not the other history, because that's the button. And we're going to tell it to do the load and save games. I'm also going to tell our dialog widget to do its load and save game over here instead of doing it back in the quick save and quick load buttons because, well, they're not the only buttons that are going to be calling the save and load game. We're also going to have our own separate save and load game widgets for each individual save and load, so we don't want to call it only over here in our save and load game. In our for our dialog variables, I mean. So let's get our dialog widget and tell it to do its save game and load game as well. Now we have to go back to our dialog, and instead of loading our game and saving our game on ourself, we are going to get our game instance, there it is, and cast it to a VN game instance. Otherwise this won't plug in properly. And we'll just plug this into here instead. Let's try seeing if this works. We hit start and we do our quick save right now because we need to overwrite our previous history. And we load and we go to our history. You'll see that we have our line 2 times. And what's going on here is our history is saving our history, including our current line. And then when we go back to our dialog and we tell it to do on the load game, and when we load our game, we do the update text. And when we update our text, the very first thing we do is add it to our history. We're adding our current line to our history twice, basically. So back in our history, we can just say on, save game, we're going to ask if the index is less than the children count -1. So if it's less than the last index, then we can actually add it to our history. So let's do a branch here and see if this fixes our problem. We'll compile, save, and play, start, quick save, quick load, go to our history, and we only have our first line. If we go back and do some more stuff and do a quick save, do a quick load, go to our history again, we still only have those 3 lines. Great. So that's working perfectly. Now we have to deal with the codex. If we were to play right now and start and go to our codex, you'll see that nothing's visible. Go to the next line and the pot can now be viewed in the codex. And if we go to our codex, there it is. There's our pot. Do a quick save and then go back to our menu, start a new game, load, go to our codex, and it's not there. And that's because our triggered flags is never being saved in our game instance, triggered flags. So we have to deal with that. Before that though, we should probably set our triggered flags to be a set instead of an array, like we did with our persistent data's unlocked gallery images. But that's going to take a little while, so I'm just going to fast forward through that and I'll explain what we had to change after I do. So basically, when you change your triggered flags to be a set, it's going to give you a bunch of errors about, well, they're the same functions that you have to call. So this used to be an array and we have to clear it, but now it is a set and we have to clear it. It's basically the same thing as what it used to be. Over here we have to add and contains and add for our triggered flags. By the way, I apologize for anyone that's watching this after following everything I did, but yeah, hopefully you decided to make it a set in the first place instead. Anyways, now that that is taken care of, let's go back to our event graph, and we were doing our triggered flags, that's right. So let's go back to our save game. We'll add a new variable. This is going to be our triggered flags, and it's going to be a set of names. And back in our game instance, wherever that may be, there it is, we're also going to just get our save game on save game and set the triggered flags to be our triggered flags. And on load game, we're just going to set our own triggered flags to be the save game's triggered flags. Into there and there. And after that, we have to update the codex to tell it that, well, we loaded our game, so our triggered flags has changed, so our codex has probably also changed. And to tell the codex that we need to update its data when we do our load game, we can actually just plug into up here in this for loop. This goes through all of our buttons in our codex and tells it to update the codex details, so that actually works out perfectly well for us. If we compile, save, and let's hit play again, do our start, go to where the pod can now be viewed, quick save, options, back to menu, start, and look at our codex, it's not viewable. And then if we do a quick load and look at our codex, our pod is now viewable, and so is Yuri. If we were to break it, do a quick save, and then go back to menu, start, look at our codex, codex, there it is, pot, it's just a pot, do a quick load, look at our codex, and our pot is sadly, it was broken, never to be usable again, because that's where we left off when we did our quick save. Now there is one more thing I forgot to do, that is changing our current background. So if we were to go to this one and do a quick save, and then we go to our menu, start new game, and then do our quick load, we end up at the second chapter, but we still have the same background. So let's deal with that. That's really simple. We'll just go back to our dialog, and on the save game, where is it? Over here, save game. We want to save the name of our background. So in our save game, we need a new variable for our current background. And this is going to be a name. It's going to be a single name. Back in our dialog, on event save game, we'll just set the current background to be our background images. Where is that background image? Here it is. Get brush, split the brush, get the image, get object name, pass that into our current brush or current background, and then on load game we are going to get our background image and set brush from texture, get the save game's current background, get object from primary asset ID, split this, choose backgrounds, plug this into here, cast to texture 2D, finally plug this into our texture. So after plugging in our execution pin to this, let's do a compile, save, and play, and we have to go to that node again because when we did our quick save last time, the variable wasn't there for our current background. So if we do a quick save now, go to our options, menu, start a new game, and then do a quick load, we're now at the right background. Great. I actually wanted to do our sounds first before I did our save, but I still don't have any music, so we can't do that. But basically, when you do your sound, you also want to save the sound that's playing, otherwise your music is going to be exactly what it used to be before you actually do the load game, unlike what it should be. It should go to the music that it's supposed to be at, but we'll get to that when we actually do our sound. It also occurred to me while I was editing the video that we don't actually need this branch over here. If we don't want the very last one, we can also just do our children count -2 instead of -1. And that should actually work for saving our history as well. If we were to compile, save, play, start, do some stuff, quick save, options, menu, start, new game, quick load, go to our history, and we still only have those 3 lines. we also actually have a bug right now. I'm not sure what's causing this bug. I'm sure I'll figure it out eventually. But if we were to go to the very last line and go to our history, the last whenever we change our chapter, the line's added twice, and I'm not entirely sure why. But just in case you were wondering what was going on, that's not an issue with our saving and loading. That's an issue with our history. But like I said, I'll probably figure that out eventually, and I'll let you know when I do. There's actually one last thing I forgot to save, and that is our player name. So that should be pretty self-explanatory by now. We're just going to go back to our save game, add a new variable. This is going to be our player name of type name. And go back to our game instance. When we do our save game, we're just going to set its player name to be our own player name. And when we do our load game, we're just going to set our own player name to be our save game's player name. And we plug in the execution pins to the right spot once again, and that should actually save it. We don't actually have a place where we enter our player name at the moment, but I doubt that this would not work. And I think that actually covers the saving and loading. I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but if there is something, I'm sure I would have edited this out as a video. So I'll hopefully see you in the next video when we'll probably add some widgets to our save game.